Hello, hello everyone. Okay, I'm actually going to minimize my photo booth thing today. See if that helps. Okay, so I felt compelled to make this video today, because I've got a lot of relative to what I've experienced in my past, processing a lot of, call them emotions, call them feelings, but energies in my body. And I think reflecting on it, it's kind of a win-win, because what I'm feeling is a lot of heaviness and pressure in my solar plexus and in my throat, which for those who are familiar are referring to the throat chakra and the solar plexus chakra. And as you might know, around the heart, our 7 main chakras are they have a connection. The solar plexus chakra, amongst other things, I'm definitely not an expert, but amongst other things, is connected to confidence and self-esteem. And your throat chakra, as you might guess, has to do with communication and sort of speaking your truth. And I feel like it's in those descriptions already where you can see the tie between these things, right? And the process of paying attention to your body and sort of feeling these energies and so on is obviously deeply relevant to the process of healing for each individual. And everyone's gonna sort of learn what connections, sort of like what kind of things are causing these things. Like, for example, in what ways are you giving away your power that will cause your solar plexus chakra to flare up? Or whose energy are you picking up on that's making you feel this way? Like, there are so many different ways that are going to be unique to each individual to trigger these kinds of things. But the main thing I wanted to speak about was about healing. Was about healing yourself and inadvertently, hopefully speak my truth and hopefully aid my own process in doing this. So let's get right to it. What I've learned in my experience, and this is one of these things that in retrospect is so obvious, but before you've had enough experiences to really feel this and see this and trust this, it's almost impossible to see and feel and trust. Because we tend to go through our life, from childhood on, and this is why, like, no one's to blame. It's not like anyone's choosing to learn to protect themselves in certain ways, but sort of this general formula of how our child's mind, but also adult mind, protects itself is, okay, event happens, feeling occurs, and then your mind tells a story about how this kind of event causes this kind of feeling equals bad, right? And then your brain, to protect itself, which again, you should love this process, you should be grateful that your body has done this for you, you should not shame the irrationality of it, right? Because we can often get stuck in disliking how our body reacts to things because our mind thinks that it knows better, so to say. But step one is always work with self-love and compassion, and every feeling is valid, no matter what it is, no matter how confusing it might be. But I want to make a whole nother video about judgment, but it's deeply related to this, but it's slightly more broad, I suppose. But yeah, we have event, feeling, and then story. And the story is what our mind, which is a very energy efficient organ, it's not really about the energy efficiency, but it's a very efficient way of protecting ourselves to avoid this kind of situation. But essentially what we learn is that because of this trauma, because of these situations that we've learned to protect ourselves through, whenever we feel this kind of feeling, our mind immediately puts resistance to it because it associates these feelings, whether it's in your body or your mind or a certain thought pattern, it associates that with this traumatic event, with that feeling. And then what we learn, because throughout life we're going to get triggered, whatever that kind of trigger is, but throughout life we're going to get triggered. And what we keep on learning now is that this feeling is bad, this feeling is difficult, this feeling is the problem, so to say. And then it can be so incredibly subtle, but we put resistance to feeling these things. We think we feel them because we know they're there, right? If we didn't know they're there, we wouldn't be putting resistance to them. But we think we're feeling our feelings. We think we're feeling them, but we're not really. Like, we know they're there, but really what we're feeling is our resistance to the feeling. And this is where the topic of judgment comes in, because, and it's in the name of self-love and so on, but it's really important that we are very careful and pay close attention to our mind and the story we tell and the judgments we have about certain feelings. Because ultimately, the recipe is very simple. Every feeling is valid. No feeling shall be judged. Ultimately, nothing shall be judged. And as I mentioned a few times now, I really want to go into judgment versus discernment, because that's very important. But ultimately, we need to learn to not judge ourselves at all. And the magic happens when we can recognize that the suffering we've associated with these feelings and these events, but specifically the feelings, is not the feeling. It's our resistance to it. It's our fear of it. And then things get real twisted, because often we are afraid of fear. And then it's just resistance to resistance. And then you're resisting the resistance of your resistance. And sometimes, ultimately, you have to go through many cycles of resistance, and you got to go through cycles of resisting your resistance to at some point, have the Ouroboros, like that's quite literally it, right? Like, you're eating your own tail, you're not getting anywhere because you're fighting fire with fire until there's so much fire, everything's fire, you can't tell anything from fire, and then you're almost at peace again. I don't know if that analogy resonates, but with everyone, but at least that's how I kind of think about it. And then you kind of get to this breaking point where, you can imagine the snake, it's eaten its tail for so long, its entire life, and it's just going around, and eventually it somehow ends up at its own neck and then eats itself, and then whoosh, and then it's gone. And then you can suddenly see that, and again, I don't want to make that sound like there's this one momentary revelation and then all of a sudden this is so clear. Like I was saying, it goes through cycles of expansion and contraction, and every time you expand and you contract, you can see this fear and you can see the resistance in a slightly new light. But what's just so important to know is, we all know what resistance feels like. But as soon as you feel resistance to something, remind yourself, maybe watch this video again, and know what I'm afraid of is not what I think I'm afraid of. What I'm afraid of is not the feeling. What I'm afraid of is the resistance I didn't know I'd been putting up to it my whole life. And as soon as you can find the courage through the experience of going through these cycles, it's like exposure therapy. You can come to a place and sit with the feelings. And I know in my personal life, I had this with my anxiety, where I was so confused, and I was trying to over-intellectualize my anxiety and these feelings. And one day I saw just how, I would have a certain trigger. I'll be specific. This was about me going to work. And it would be a certain time about me stepping into the lab where I would get this pit in my stomach. And obviously my body hated that. I do not like pits in my stomach because those always mean something bad. They're always associated with something bad, something I don't like, something I'm judging, something I'm resisting, something, I want to separate myself from. But in the realization that we are not separate from anything, we are so interconnected with everything, and all these things we're trying to resist and we're trying to distance ourselves from and trying to separate, those are all divine aspects of us as well. And the ugliness of it is the shadow we cast on it, right? It's the shadow we cast over the feeling. It's really like you know, the fear we may have experienced about going into a dark basement, you know. In theory, you know, from a certain perspective, we know this basement is safe. We know it's safe. But the story our mind tells about what could possibly be in the darkness, because we haven't had the courage to look at it, that's where all the fear comes from. That's where the resistance comes from. That's where the tension comes from. And as soon as we have the courage to take those steps down and turn the light switch on, here the analogy would be to sit with those feelings, to sit with whatever's happening, you know, slowly or quite quickly you can recognize, whoa, anxiety is not what I thought it was. Hurt is not what I thought, like rejection is not what I thought it was. All these negative things that we're so deeply afraid of, we're not afraid of them. We're afraid of the resistance that we've learned to put up to them. And again, that's not a bad thing. Do not shame, do not resist your resistance. Do not judge the resistance you have built to these things, because these things have trust, these things have protected you at times in your life when you were not as strong and not as emotionally mature as you are now. So, yeah. So how do you do this? How do you do this? That sounds like too good to be true, too easy. You know, if the recipe is just don't judge anything and just sit with your feelings, but you might think, I don't want to sit with my feelings. That's always confusing. It's always leading me to have a panic attack, you know, or this and that. And again, I'm not a mental health professional. If these things are like deeply affecting your life, and you know, whether you've got suicidal tendencies or you are at risk of having panic attacks when meditating, for example, which is possible, go see a professional. Go, please. This is not my ballpark. But what I want to say is, for me personally, this would not have been possible without meditation, because and this kind of ties in with another issue I have with how our world, especially in the West, thinks about a lot of these issues, and that's that's to do with our mind, right? We're very much in a doing mindset, in a fixing mindset, in a solving mindset. You know, this feeling is not nice, it must be fixed. There must be some set of steps that we can take, that we can do to fix this, so that we are the version of ourselves that we want to be, right? You are already, what you want to be is already in you. There's nothing you must do. You must do less. That's really the beautiful thing about this. But also, you know, like once you realize this, you're like, fuck, you know, this is so crazy. And you, on some level, you know this, because you know how certain situations or certain friends or certain people can just bring that version out of you. You didn't do anything to get there, right? You didn't fix something. It was just a certain circumstance, a certain relationship, a certain something, right? Showed you that is already within you. And what stops you from always expressing this is not the lack of something. And this brings me to another video I really want to make, which is about how incredibly powerful our words are. And I'm sure you've heard it a million times about lack mindsets and so on, but there's very specific things that we tend to say all the time that I would love to go into. Let me just make sure I'm recording this, because that would not be fun. Okay. Okay, I'm definitely recording. Where was I? Something about, oh yeah, resisting. Right, how you can actually do this. Because yeah. I don't want to say thinking is a problem. Thoughts are not a problem. Do not judge thoughts. Do not resist thoughts. All of that is great. You need thoughts, you know. I'm having all these video ideas now. This is great. I want to talk about the ego as well, and how a lot of people want to resist the ego, want to dispel the ego, and so on. The ego has its issues, but the issues is in our story we tell about it. That's a whole thing, okay, but you can get excited for that if that resonates. But yes, our problem is not that we're not doing enough. Our problem is not that we need to fix something. Our problem is that we need to stop thinking about our feelings. We need to... Let me explain what I mean. We need to stop over-intellectualizing them. We can think about them afterwards, after we've felt them, right? Once we've really sat with them and not try to essentially put them in a box with our thinking, afterwards it's useful. We can think, we can ask ourselves, where did that come from? Why did I feel this way, right? With no judgment. But what's really important is that the healing and the processing, it's effortless. All we need to do is not resist. Allow it. And then the more you trust, the more you do not resist, the more often you don't resist, the more you can trust that you will be okay. Because in this basement that is currently dark and you're terrified of what's possibly in there, there's nothing, there's just you. You're not going to hurt yourself, And all of these things are beautiful parts of you that are pointing at incredibly important things that you genuinely want to find out, right? There's probably some really important things in that basement. But if if you're afraid of what could possibly be in this basement, even though really these things that could hurt you are not really in this basement, or at least I'm telling you right now, there's nothing in this basement that can truly hurt you besides your own resistance to them, then we allow ourselves to be. And that's really it. We need to stop doing and we need to start being. We need to start accepting just how we are. Because all of our suffering comes from this discrepancy between how we think we should be and how we think the world is or should be, and how we experience ourselves to actually be, or how we perceive ourselves to actually be, which again is all through this lens of thinking. It's all through this story. It's all through this judgment, which comes from the trauma, which comes from the healing that hasn't been done yet, right? But because it's all connected, this very simple knowledge that all you must do is be. You mustn't do anything. You must just be, and you'll see that the more you sit with the feelings, the more experienced you become. It's not an intellectual knowledge thing that comes as well, right? Because your mind will inevitably think about these things. But if you sit without thinking, if you meditate and allow these things to pass through, and this is not news, right? But I'm trying to put this into a context that might be a little bit more like clear or practical. But then, there's something I wanted to say, but I've kind of lost my thread now. But like when you can be okay with anything that comes through your system, you're nearly invincible. And it's not a superficial invincibility that comes from a place of insecurity, of thinking you're always safe, because thinking you're safe will make you feel safe in the moment. It's this profound radical okayness of knowing that you will be okay no matter what experience comes through you. And this is also deeply tied to the concept of the ego and the concept of the self. And that will be discussed in another video. But y'all, I hope that resonated. That was something really powerful for me to reflect on over the last few days. Going through my own healing journey, and really feeling feelings in a way that I never have, and recognizing that it's, this here and this here, it doesn't feel nice. Like, you know, my throat kind of tightening, or a heaviness on my chest, or a pit in my stomach, or my stomach twisting. That's not a nice feeling. But if I reflect back to how much I suffered and how much I prolonged these negative feelings because I didn't allow them to pass through me, because I didn't allow them for me to feel them, because I didn't like them, because I judged them, because I resisted them, I didn't love them, I didn't embrace them as a part of me which I must love, because I deserve to love every part of me, and that goes for everyone. So please, and it's this crazy, like, there's this crazy non-duality of being really hard, because we're so mind centered, we're so stuck in our mind. What I'm telling you can seem hard because it will not satisfy your mind. It will not satisfy your mind at first. But at the same time, it's so easy because your mind doesn't have to do anything. And what your mind is worried about in this healing journey, it's so overwhelming. There's so many things to do. You know, there's so much to heal. There's so much to do that, you know, blah, blah, blah. Just realize that's just more chatter. That's just more resistance. That's your mind making excuses, stepping away from just feeling. Just feeling. But realize your mind is not... Your mind thinks it's resisting the emotion. Well, in a sense, sorry. Your mind thinks it fears the emotion, but it doesn't. It fears the resistance. And I think you can see how that, you know, you need courage. You really need courage. And please, I hope this video gives you the courage to take that first step, right? Because you have to take those steps into the dark basement. You have to be in the dark for a second before you can shine a light everywhere. And once you do, you're playing a different game. And this healing process, while, again, I'd much rather not feel, you know, my throat closing and other things, but there's almost a sense of playfulness and a sense of looking forward to getting through it. It's almost like, you know, it's almost like watching a really intense movie, and you know, right? It's very context dependent. When you watch a really intense movie, you know, you can have a pit in your stomach and you can be really afraid, and all sorts of emotions are coming through. But because you don't associate this experience of watching a movie and feeling that, right, like, that's separate from the real trauma. Often, you know, not necessarily. People can be triggered by all sorts of things as well, which is totally valid. But normally when we watch these shows, we don't have that association, but we know that we can have these feelings and be okay because it's going to be over, and we don't have to resist it because it's not real. It's just coming from the show. So if you can reframe that, not only is the process much less painful because you remove your own resistance to it, removing the resistance also means that the feeling itself, that is in of itself not comfortable, goes away quicker because it can move, it can pass through. I love this saying that Matthias de Stefano, I'm sure he didn't come up with it, but I heard it from him, that emotions should be energy in motion. And the issue is, if we do not allow this energy that we feel to stay in motion because we stop it, it'll get stuck and it'll stay there, right? And then we can suppress it, we can stop feeling it for a while, but it'll come back, right? And the longer and the more it's there, these more ethereal, immaterial energies will ultimately manifest and come out in uglier ways. And this is also, again, this is always the case when we judge things. Whenever we cast our own shadow onto anything, and this is within ourselves, about the world, anything. Again, it's so difficult because it doesn't satisfy the mind, but how this motherfucking reality works is so profoundly simple and so profoundly beautiful because there is nothing to judge, right? If you can put that as your North Star, to let go of judgment entirely, and alchemize your judgment into discernment, right? Because the judgment comes from a trauma, but the trauma comes from a lesson. Sort of the diamond at the core of that trauma is an ability to discern something, right? With every trauma, with every judgment, there's something there that you've learned, but you gotta let go of the judgment. And that reminds me of, again, I'll talk more about this in the judgment video, but that reminds me of something that Robert Edward Grant, also a great dude, said, which is, we will attract everything we judge until we stop judging everything we attract. We will attract that which we judge until we stop judging that which we attract. And the reason is because judgment means suppression, means it cannot pass through us, which means the energy as well as the manifestation of that energy will stay. It'll keep coming back. So we need to transcend this mechanism. We need to the Ouroboros needs to sort of eat itself up all the way to realize, oh, I don't want this certain thing in my life. And that's valid, right? That's your discernment. You know this thing does not serve you. It's not in your highest benefit. But as long as you judge it, you have this sort of separation between this desire to separate you from it. As long as you have an expectation that it goes away, right? It's really about the intention. It's very subtle, but you can this is not about accepting everything, right? Like, discernment is very important, but if you can let go, if you keep judging, so trying to separate yourself from the things that are not in your best interest, they will keep coming back, because it's your judgment that creates the tension. It's your judgment that creates the tension between you and this thing that you judge, and it will keep coming back. And it is so incredibly empowering to transcend it and say, yes, this is not in my best interest. This is not for me, but I love it. I love it unconditionally, not in a, oh, I love it, give it to me, I want more of it, but in a, this is an expression of my higher self. This is an expression of God, this is an expression of the universe, whatever you want to call it. Every part, everything has its place as a reward, as a learning lesson, as a challenge, as like whatever it is. All of these aspects are divine. Things feel good, things feel bad, or difficult, or challenging. Certain things have a qualia of good and bad, but there's no such thing as should or shouldn't. There's no. You will keep suffering if you say some things should not be, right? And it's in this, it's God, it's so hard to put into words, but it's in the process of letting go of your judgment where you will actually achieve that which you truly want, which is having this energy that you in the past judged and now have discerned and have figured out is not for you, and then it goes. And I've seen this so often in my own life, and yeah. I'll leave you with one more thing that was also inspired by Robert Edward Grant, which is the word universe. He says you inverse, right? So the universe is like the inverse of you. So everything that happens out here is a reflection of what's in here. And if you believe in manifestation and the law of attraction, this is why that's true. My sort of twist on it was universe is like you in verse, a verse being like a spoken word, a conversation. So it's like you are always in a karmic, reflective conversation with the world. And if you can remember that whenever there's resistance to something inside of you or something outside of you, that the problem is not, first of all, there's no problem, but the problem is not this thing that you're perceiving to cause the resistance. the knot that can let go is your judgment of this thing. And now I've spoken so much about judgment, I don't even know if I need to make this judgment video. I think that all kind of came together nicely. And what's beautiful is that my solar plexus has totally calmed down, and so is my throat. So, yeah. I love you guys. Literally in the last few hours, my subscriber count has doubled. So hello. Thank you for all your comments and all your likes. This is totally crazy. I've never had an audience greater than my group of friends, and this is obviously very different. But I'm super excited. Keep commenting. Have great conversations in the comment section. Share all your love. I have so much love to give out to all of you. You all deserve to be loved. All your niggly, gross bits that you're all rejecting, right? If you can't love that yet, for what it's worth, I love all those aspects of you as well. And I mean that from the bottom of my heart. And yeah, on a different note, slightly different note, I just throwing it out there, but we'll probably soon have a little Discord community place, because there might be some other channels coming up as well that are kind of linked to this channel, and that Discord community could be a really beautiful place for people to meet and talk about these things and discuss and really apply these ideas and really do the healing, because ultimately that's what all of this is about. Oh God, what a world. Can any of you believe this? I can't. Thank you for listening. Y'all are precious. Take care. Bye.